Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are really happy that you're here for our webinar, You've Done SOC 2, What's Next? Before we get started, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to view it again on demand with the same link you used to register. Second, we really want to make sure you get something out of this webinar. If you have any questions during when our speakers are speaking, please just type in your question into the chat, and we will have designated time at the end for a live Q&A with our speakers. And with that, we can get started. I will introduce everyone to our two speakers today. First, we have Charlie Wood. And Charlie is the Executive Vice President in the Bonadeo Group's Information Risk Management Division and the co-founder of Fox Point Solutions, which is an industry-leading IT risk management professional services firm. Charlie has a wealth of experience in the information technology industry. He has a focus and experience on security hardening, data privacy, vulnerability identification and remediation, internal and external audits, controls optimization and compliance, and general project management. And prior to joining Bonadeo, Charlie worked in the System Performance Assurance Group at a Big Four firm, where he obtained extensive enterprise risk management experience with respect to IT security reviews to support critical business processes for clients in multiple industries. Thanks, Charlie, for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
You guys will also be hearing from Aidan Collins today. Aidan is the head of enterprise business at Hyperproof, the leading provider of compliance operations software solutions. In this role, Aidan works with organizations to operationalize the complex requirements of a range of compliance frameworks, including those from NIST and ISO. Aidan has built and led professional services teams at organizations including Deloitte, PwC, and Bain, and he has a wealth of experience in all aspects of security risk management, compliance, and IT assurance. Aidan, in addition, Aidan is also an experienced board member and an advisor to senior management teams, bringing both strategic insight and a controls mindset to enhance board performance and organizational success. Thanks, Aidan, for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks, JC, and good morning, everybody.
Okay, I will turn it over to Aidan to talk a bit about the trends in SOC 2 world.
Great, and thanks again, JC. And Charlie, great to be here with you today. The fact that everybody's here means that you're well familiar with SOC 2, and you've likely gone through the journey that's gotten you to here. And I recall maybe being older than many folks here back in the days when we had what we called SAS 70 reports. And those were the original service organization control reports. And there were very few of them because there weren't that many organizations that provided the kinds of services that merited a SAS 70 controls review. Man, the world has changed. Now it seems like everybody needs and is required to get a service organization control report, a SOC 2 report of some form or another. So we've seen that significant increase in the demand for those reports across all sectors of organizations. And that's added to then the work that folks in security assurance and compliance have to do. They're visited multiple times by auditors across a range of frameworks. They've got multiple, oftentimes conflicting requirements that they have to meet. And as they grow and as they evolve, then the business places requirements upon them to potentially do other frameworks and audits. And so really the theme for us today is to understand, now that you've been through SOC 2, it might have been a painful experience. It might have been some lessons learned for the organization, but hopefully it set you up with a mindset to go forward. And how can you do that most efficiently, effectively? And what else can you get out of the work that you've done on SOC 2? Charlie, anything you want to add to that?
Now, you actually brought up the SAS 70. That's actually been retired for almost 11 years. And in the fall of last year, we got a contract from an organization that said, hey, we've got to be, SAS 70 compliant. And we looked, and there it was in the contract. They had to be SAS 70 compliant. So it's out there. People don't often ask or understand what they're asking for sometimes, but we got to where we needed to be. But it was funny you brought up SAS 70 because I hadn't heard that in a while.
I think I'm just giving away my age here, Charlie, but if you need staff support on the SAS 70 work, just give me a call. Happy to help.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. And so just building upon that, then as we move from the SOC 2 work that we've done, beyond compliance, what does it mean for the organization? And I know, Charlie, that you're talking to a lot of the organizations that you work with, and you've done a lot of SOC 2 work over the years. How do you talk to your clients about what, now that they've done it, what the benefits are that they should be seeing from it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the primary benefit that we see for our customers are that they've established and built a sustainable process and have established a baseline of best security practices. If you look at SOC 2 for what it is, it's developed by the AICPA. It's some prescriptive controls around security in some other areas, but really from our perspective, it's the baseline of what you need in order to be, efficient and demonstrate that you have the appropriate security controls in place. And by going through this process, as Aidan mentioned earlier, it might have been painful, but you've essentially established a top-down approach for controls, implementation, and hopefully at some point optimization. So we hope that the SOC 2 help drive some efficiencies in your organization, but more importantly, that it helps secure your customer data. It helps you, build sustainable, repeatable controls processes, which will be able to be leveraged if you need to go down the road of any other law, regulation, and standard. Like we saw on the previous slide, we had HIPAA, PCI, NIST, ISO. It's really a great foundation for those control frameworks going forward, and hopefully it's help you guys establish a sustainable IT compliance program as well.
I think that's well stated, Charlie, and we'd like to think, right, that the heavy lift that's gone into SOC 2 will not only satisfy those requirements, but set us up for what comes next. And for many organizations, rather, what comes next is either doing more on SOC 2, and hopefully they've set up that initial set of standards and policies and procedures that will make that easier going forward, but then lead into the other kinds of control frameworks that either internally in the organization we decide are worth following, or oftentimes are placed upon us by either customers or regulators. And those include the ones that you mentioned, Charlie, SOX and HIPAA, HITRUST, NIST, et cetera. And then the other thing that comes out here, and JC mentioned this in one of our earlier conversations, is that as states look to and respond to this ever-increasing threats from the cyber bad actors that organizations face, this idea of adopting safe harbor will require organizations to demonstrate good faith. And one way to demonstrate good faith is to show that we're working towards compliance to these additional, more enhanced frameworks. Charlie, as you're working with your customers, many of them, as you said, have gone through the heavy lift of SOC 2. As they think about, and you've worked with them on adding on NIST and NIST CSF or HITRUST or ISO, anything that you're seeing out there that organizations should be mindful of?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and they're well laid out here on this slide, is, as you go down the road of, let's say, PCI or NIST or ISO, you're going to have multiple frameworks that phrase things slightly differently. And so what we've found is that, when we're going out and we're helping our clients through a SOC audit, and maybe they'll say, hey, can you help us do some PCI work? We're finding that, they're struggling with mapping the controls from one framework to the other. There's duplicate controls in almost every law, regulation, and standard that you can think of. And so, they're struggling with not only collecting that information, but understanding what really is being asked. And so, we see a lot of times we go to organizations, let's say they're a 10 or 15 person startup tech company. They got real work to do. And real work isn't go pull, evidence for an auditor because he's asking for all the power users in AD. They might have somebody that can do that, but it's taken away from the real work to do that. Additionally, they may have other auditors coming in and asking for similar but not exact information. So, we've seen our customers that are struggling with sitting through these walkthroughs, understanding what the auditor is asking. And so it makes it fairly inefficient. And the other thing we're seeing over the past year is nobody wants to use spreadsheets anymore. They want an automated solution that they can, leverage, year after year after year. Because the other thing that we've seen, especially since COVID hit, there's been a lot of people leaving their companies. And so when they leave, so does that knowledge. And if they're one of our audit contacts, they're throwing somebody else in place, and now they don't understand what we're asking for. So again, it comes down to essentially efficiency, and so that's the biggest struggle that we see. Aiden, can you talk about the stat you have here at the bottom?
Yeah, and if it really just reflects what you're seeing with your clients as well, Charlie, we do an annual IT compliance benchmarking survey where we survey over 1,000 practitioners and ask them a range of questions. And it's informative in many respects, but one of the themes that came out in this last report that we issued in February was that of our respondents, almost half of them report spending up to half their time on the kind of work, Charlie, that you were just talking about there, on this working in spreadsheets and gathering information from across the organization and sharing it with auditors. Oftentimes, as you said, Charlie, right, it's the doing almost the same thing over and over again because some framework or some request is just slightly different. And we absolutely applaud your thinking around it's time to move away from spreadsheets, and other parts of the business have done that, and our time has come to do that. And so that getting more effective at the operations piece of it is one strong reason to think differently about going forward. The other reason is, and also coming out of the benchmark survey, is that organizations that take a very compliance-focused approach, just think about what exactly do I need to do to meet that requirement, as opposed to thinking more broadly, are ones that experience more lapses or violations. And so there's a real result here from, on the one hand, not being very effective on the operations side, and then secondly, being too narrowly focused around just meeting that requirement and not thinking more broadly about it, that results in these kinds of challenges and incidents. And so I think it's all building up to saying that going forward, we have to shift to that more risk management approach on the one hand, and then being able to get much more efficient and effective about operations. Does that make sense to you, Charlie?
It does, and it sort of underscores why risk assessments are so important. And basically in every law, regulation, and standard, there's a requirement to understand organizational risk, because you can't protect what you haven't identified as a potential risk.
Yeah, and that's right. And we've had in the profession over the last 10, 15 years a significant shift to being much more risk focused and thinking about it through the lens of risk. And I know from my service on the couple of boards I've been involved with, that's typically the communication that we're getting from the organization and from management is less around controls, something around compliance, but a lot around risk. So being able to shift the conversation into using that risk approach that rolls up what we're doing around controls, and then at the same time talking about compliance. And then the challenge for compliance practitioners is to do that at scale over time with increasing demands upon our time. And that argues for both that focus on a risk management lens and very strongly focusing about operations. And that really sets us up for where we want to go from here, It's the idea that organizations have done this work around SOC 2. Hopefully, in our comments, Charlie and I have made at least a reasonable case to why it makes sense to think about now going forward in a more agile, scalable, efficient kind of way. But what does that mean? And what does that transition look like? When we talk to our customers and we work with our partners like Charlie and Bonadil, then we'll often characterize where organizations are and where they're going using this maturity spectrum. And I'm going to argue that most organizations and many of the folks on this call this morning find ourselves at that level 1 space where a lot of the security assurance compliance work that we're doing, the controls work that we're doing, it's reactive. It's driven by external events. Oftentimes those are audits. It's led by folks in roles around security assurance or risk or compliance. Lots of the work is done manually, and Charlie already alluded to spreadsheets. We see a lot of that, and it seems to be the state of play in many organizations. And then partially driven by the fact that it's reactive, workflows are by definition very ad hoc. There's a lot to do and a lot to get done by a small number of people, and a lot of redundancy and duplication in that effort. Charlie, let me punt back to you and just in your working with a range of organizations, do some of these attributes make sense to you?
Yeah, they all do, Aiden. And some of the things that we continue to see is struggle to be able to marry, compliance risk to operations. A lot of times we'll go into organizations and most specifically with COVID-19, you'll go in the prior year, things seem to be operating effectively. But because of some changes here, there, and everywhere because of COVID, controls seem to fall down because it's not truly baked in to really the operational aspect of the organization. And so we've actually been told and asked by our customers to come in and do more audits instead of doing it, twice a year for like a 1 year SOC 2 type 2. They want us to come in quarterly because they want us to essentially ensure that the controls operate effectively. So if we go in quarter 1 and we find a number of exceptions, they want to be able to use that to go back and drive home the message that these controls aren't operating effectively. And that's been a significant shift from where we were pre-COVID.
That's a really good point, Charlie. I hadn't thought about that, but I'm sure everybody on this call that works in working with auditors will be delighted to hear that you're coming in more frequently, and we'll just add to their workload. But I think you've called out a couple of things there, right? That the idea of being able to institutionalize the knowledge around this, and you gave the great example earlier, Charlie, when you said somebody leaves, and a lot of that knowledge goes with them. And the challenge of trying to capture initially that knowledge somewhere outside of somebody's head is never going to be answered by a spreadsheet. And then if somebody moves or is not there anymore, how do you continue that? And I can imagine a lot of what you might have to deal with is this feeling of we're restarting all the time. We're not making a lot of huge forward progress, but we seem to be restating or having to reperform a lot of the same kinds of tasks because of those changes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the other thing is it's lost productivity for our clients, right? Your network administrator leaves and, you've got auditors coming in and they've got real work to do. They got to in the process, and that takes them away from real work. And then for us to be going in there, more frequently than we were in prior years for the sake of driving home, continued operational effectiveness of the controls, again, takes away from those organizations and just makes their jobs a little bit harder. So it's a delicate balance, and it's something that we're always cognizant of, but it's something we've seen since COVID hit.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so how do we move beyond that? And one way to think about that is that level 1 is characterized by individuals or small groups of people in specific roles being reactive to events, doing a lot of work in tools that are really not fit for purpose. And the first step to move beyond that is to try to bring as quickly as possible with the existing content that we have around controls and risks and programs, bring that under control in some platform, some technology. And that's where Hyperproof certainly comes in, others also, but where Hyperproof comes in is that we think about how do we provide an operating platform for the doers? How do we enable people who are having to execute these kinds of tasks repeatedly? Where do they find a place to live? And how can they at least initially get much more efficient around that kind of work? And then that's characterized by what it's still going to be reactive. We're still responding to audits or other kinds of requests. It's still being led by people in compliance or risk assurance kinds of roles. At least now we can build a foundation for getting more efficient. We can start to quickly eliminate a lot of the redundancies. Simple example, Hyperproof focuses a lot on ensuring that all of the evidence that we collect from the testing of controls, the evidence that auditors and assessors will ask us for, it's in one place and it's tagged to a control or it's tagged to an audit. So the next time I need it, it's there. I'm not chasing around trying to find it. And that technology, as simple as it sounds, can really relieve a lot of the pressure and relieve a lot of the repeated work that organizations otherwise, and more pointedly individuals, will have to do. So we think that we see that as a good starting point. Charlie, we've been fortunate to work with you for a little while now. And I think you're starting to see some of your clients transition to this kind of a platform. Are you seeing other benefits that they're getting from that as well?
Yeah, the ability to, obtain the data one time and have it be cascaded for multiple controls across multiple frameworks is critical. And it's also, using the scenario that we've been talking about for the last couple of minutes, when someone leaves, there's a repository which demonstrates what we've done in prior years, what was acceptable. So it's not a back and forth of emails or calls to the individuals to try to figure out what it is they need. Again, it comes back to efficiency, which is obviously important for all of our customers.
Yeah, exactly. And when we talk about level 3, really what we're talking about, and this is where Hyperproof has been a little dogmatic around what we see where the world has to go to. It's this idea that compliance operations as a discipline is an important discipline, and it's one that needs to be supported by appropriate technology and methodology. And what characterizes that level is really less around the reactive, more around the proactive, forward-looking, being able to look out at the landscape and say, what's happening in the business and what do we need to be able to do? How can I talk to the organization about the requirements that whatever decisions we're making will place upon us as compliance practitioners? And a great example there is that we're entering new markets and maybe we have new compliance requirements to meet because of those geographical needs, or we're launching new products and our customers are demanding certain kinds of compliance actions from us. It's powerful to be able to go to the business and say, here's what that looks like based upon what we've already done, as opposed to saying, let's start and investigate that. And Hyperproof, for example, makes that real by using a feature called Jumpstart that looks at your current controls environment, current compliance environment, and says, based upon what you've done, here's what's left to do for these other compliance requirements by crosswalking across various frameworks. That kind of proactive thinking will become very important as we go forward. And then the other piece, and maybe the biggest single difference then, is this move from doing all the work ourselves to enabling people across the organization to do their piece and meeting them where they are. I'm fond of telling the story of the IT folks who live exclusively in Jira. It's their happy place. And so we need to be in a place where if we're asking something of them, if they need to respond to a request, then let them do that in Jira because that's where they'll work. And so that thinking, being able to meet users where they are, making it easy for them to do what they need to do to support the compliance activities is a key piece of what that future vision looks like, and a key piece of what we want to enable within Hyperproof. And then the last part I'll say is that just reflective of what I said at level 2, having a single place to work, having a place that is, as compliance and risk assurance practitioners, is our happy place, where the workflows are standardized, where we add on as much automation as possible, and we start to drive the narrative as opposed to being reactive all the time. That's the journey that Charlie and I are working on with many of the organizations out there that we're working together on, and we see the future as being more driven by that. So, obvious question is, well, how do we do that? How do we move? And so I'm going to walk through a couple of thoughts around what needs to be in place. And it's going to talk a lot about technology support and platform support. And by definition, that's going to include some reference to Hyperproof as a platform, but it's not intended to be overly selling on Hyperproof. I want you to see the capabilities that we think are important. And Charlie will comment as well around how he sees that being instantiated within his customers. And so just to reiterate what I said earlier on, getting everything in one place, in one platform, so that risks and controls and requirements and all the work around that is easy to work on in one place. At Hyperproof, we're fond of saying that give us whatever you have now. Give us your content, an Excel spreadsheet of controls or a request list from an auditor. Let's start there and then iterate going forward. The idea of, and some of you people may have been through a GRC implementation in the past, and if you have, and I've lived through a few of them, they take a lot of time and a lot of investment of time and resource before you get started. In this new world of SaaS software, getting to value quickly is important. And so getting started quickly is what Hyperproof and other tools will enable, and then moving forward. Charlie, are you seeing that with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it though, Aiden. This platform and the use of a one-stop shop for a repository and controls and evidence collection is exactly what my customers want. They don't want a My Portal. They want something that's a little bit more interactive, easy to use, and something that's going to help drive, again, the efficiencies going forward.
And you mentioned evidence, Charlie, and I'll jokingly sometimes say that we're called Hyperproof for a reason because of just the centrality of having to deal with that challenge. And you talked about it earlier when you talked about requests coming into the organization from auditors and others that are, they're similar, but they're not quite the same thing, and we have to respond to them, but essentially we're providing the same information. And that's a core value prop around what we should expect from technology support and security assurance and compliance. It's the ability to not only stand up our controls and our programs and our requirements, but then as we test those controls over time, to make sure that the evidence that we gather is gathered once and reused often, reused across controls, reused across programs and requirements, made available once to an auditor or an assessor. So we're avoiding the audit fatigue that sometimes we see in organizations where we're asking our colleagues for something over and over again, and they don't understand why the first time they answer the question isn't sufficient. And we know that we have a slightly different requirement on them now, but we need to get much better at being able to meet them where they are and make their life as easy as possible as well. And to add to that, then we live in a highly integrated technology environment. And so we have to do better at automating the tasks that we're otherwise currently asking people to do. And a first step there, a critical first step there, is to look across your environment, look at where your evidence is coming from, and quickly determine what of that can be automated. And for us at Hyperproof, what that means with our customers is that we look at their environments, and we do a routine exercise periodically where we look across all of our customers and say, where are they extracting evidence from, and how can we automate that? And we use a terminology called hypersync, and that's the description of what's an environment that we want to extract evidence from, what are the services in there, and AWS is a good example, or Azure or GitHub, where there are specific services with specific resource types How do we get that out? And then how do we move away from having to ping our AWS security administrator every month for something and move to where we're automatically extracting that evidence? Charlie, one question that comes up sometimes in the conversations we have with organizations is, well, that's nice. You can extract that evidence, but will my auditor be willing to accept that? How do you respond to that?
We certainly would. We want to ensure the completeness and the accuracy of the information, so we could do that in a one-stop review with the individual that was, providing it to us. I know you're going to actually pull it, but we would also want the network administrator to just confirm that, in their opinion, that it was complete, accurate, and valid. And then from there, we could also rely on your SOC report as well, and gain reasonable comfort over that, and as such, be able to accept that data without a significant amount of additional work. So again, it would drive the efficiencies that we would like to see, and our customers would like to see as well.
Good. And Charlie and I have had conversations, and one of the things that you helped us understand at Hyperproof was that the last point that you made about not only extracting the evidence in an automatic way, but making it clear where it came from. And so that resulted in us including within our evidence extraction the full audit trail, for instance. And so now you as an auditor or a customer can look at the evidence that's extracted in Hyperproof and will see the hyperlink to where it came from. And so you can immediately reperform that extraction in a view way if you wanted to. And so enabling the level of assurance around evidence automation will be important. So what we try to capture there was some of the key attributes and features and functionality that you should expect to see in the tooling that supports your transition from level 1 to level 2 as you get more efficient and as you're able to hopefully get control over the beast that is working around these security assurance and compliance reviews. So how do you move then to the next level? How do you move to this nirvana of what we call level 3, where you've taken advantage of the efficiencies that come from using technology to support your work going from level 1 to level 2? You're still probably doing a lot of that work within your own organization, within your own group. How do you extend that out? And then how do you think about the broader set of business value that allows you to demonstrate to the organization that the work you're doing is making a difference? And the first thing I'll say there is that ensure that you've got a crisp understanding of how the work that you've already done can leverage into the work that you want to do or the business wants you to do for them. And one great example of that is getting a head start on programs that are becoming more popular, like ISO 27001, or potentially even some of the privacy, GDPR, CCPA kinds of frameworks as well. And one of the features within Hyperproof is this crosswalking and linking of controls. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when I characterize it as jumpstart, being able to say, if I've done this work on SOC 2, I want to think about what else could I do, should I do? What have I already gotten done? And what's the delta? Charlie, as you talk to your clients, is this something that you find useful for them?
Extremely useful. The crosswalk between the control frameworks is amazing. We've been hired over the years to perform these similar procedures. And as I said before, the result is a spreadsheet mapped to any number of frameworks. But, as cybersecurity risks change every day and various state laws are passed in the cyberspace, it becomes increasingly more difficult to stay up to par with all the laws, regulations, and standards that you have to adhere to. So by having a solution like Hyperproof, it's already had this stuff baked in. I can, if I'm a nationwide company that wants to address power users for HIPAA, PCI, and then any state regulatory need, I can go here and it's done for me already. I don't have to go get somebody. I'm not looking at spreadsheets again. It's just extremely valuable to my customers.
Good. And we've spent a lot of time building out those crosswalks that you talk about, Charlie. We have currently 55 frameworks in Hyperproof, and we're adding new ones all the time. When I did a demo yesterday, it was 54, and I was surprised to see it was 55 this morning in my last demo. So adding those in is important, and our content strategy is driven by what the market sees, what you as our partner and other partners tell us, what our customers are telling us. But I think you're right, Charlie. The ability to have that and not worry about it, and trying to do this in spreadsheets. You and I have sat through more than our fair share of spreadsheets and try to work through them. It's not tenable. And so getting it into effective technology is very, very important and very valuable. The second piece of that is really the biggest shift from level 2 to level 3 is getting others involved and understanding and enabling people across the organization who candidly know more about the control than we will know, enabling them to engage with us the right way, making it easy for them to do that within technology like Hyperproof, but also outside of it. If my happy IT person wants to stay in their happy place, then we should enable them to do that in Jira or Asana or Confluence or wherever they happen to operate. If we have a user that's very comfortable just operating in their email inbox, then let's give them the opportunity to safely and securely interact with us that way. Let's not make it more challenging for them, and as I said earlier, meet them where they are. And so being able to distribute that in an effective way. You can certainly try to do that in a spreadsheet, but it's not fun. And then, as Charlie talked about at the very beginning, when people move, they leave organizations, they change roles. The institutional knowledge that's around that control at a very specific level, we need to keep that. And we need to make it easily available to the next person who takes on that role. And a platform like Hyperproof has numerous features that captures that knowledge, captures that institutional learning, and ensures that it continues to be available to whomever is in that role next. And the last piece I'll mention is that then move to where there are standardized workflows to review controls. And some of that's automation, some of that's around being able to have the right evidence available at the right time. Some of it's around ensuring that there's a fixed set of workflows that everybody's aware of. Control owners do their piece, compliance and risk assurance people do their piece, auditors do their piece, and set up a cadence to do that. One of our customers has 17 or 18 different frameworks that they worry about, and their CIO or CTO rather was spending a good chunk of his time having to remember each month or each quarter to remind people to do certain things, and just making sure that controls were tested in advance of an audit and making sure evidence was gathered. We put in place a feature in Hyperproof called Freshness that essentially says for a control, here's what needs to happen on some frequency. And that might be every month or every quarter, and then automate that. And so we move from having our poor customer having to call people up and remind them and remember to do that, to having technology do what it does best, which is these kinds of routine tasks in the instance here. So that's a key piece of removing the stress around managing audits and managing assessments. And then related to that is to review controls on an ongoing basis and look at what's happening in your world, making sure that the evaluations you're doing are based on data. What are you seeing? So having visibility into where your controls are, where your compliance requirements are, where your programs are, where your automation is around evidence, where your control owners are around their responsibilities, capturing all of that and capturing that in one place, allowing you to wake up in the morning and have a place to go that says, here's what I need to do today. Here's what is open. Here's what needs to be worked on. That's a critical need and something that we want to make sure that we offer within Hyperproof as well. Charlie, we're coming to the end of some of our comments here. Anything you want to add around that level 3 view?
The dashboard is extremely valuable for not only our folks, but as well as our customers. It allows you the transparency of understanding where the bottlenecks are in the process, but it also gives you a sense of where you are throughout the course of the year. So it's been valuable, and it's one of the things that, again, you can't get out of, a spreadsheet or anything else. So, and also, full disclosure, I used to be on the other side of the table. I was a system administrator and a programmer for years, so it would drive me nuts to sit through these audits, to be asked multiple things. I would provide my evidence as needed, and then I'd come back and my boss would slap my hand, 2 months later and go, "Hey, you never provided this." And I go, "Yes, I did. It's right here. I sent it via email." And so to have this dashboard and this transparency is, again, extremely valuable.
And that's a good point, Charlie. And the other dashboarding that we provide is on the audit side, managing the data request list from auditors. That can get lost as well. And Hyperproof has a feature that allows us to manage those data requests in an equal kind of way. So that leads us really to our position around how to do this the right way going forward, is to shift the mindset really into this idea of compliance operations as an operating model, and using technology to support that, and enabling us to move from individuals and small groups of people doing everything in a somewhat chaotic, very reactive way, to one where the entire organization engages the right way, in the right technology, in the right places for them. And we're going to argue that the way forward looks like this compliance operations operating model. It looks like being able to have workflow and collaboration, to be able to enable people across the organization to work with us in an easy and comfortable way for them. It also means that automating a lot of the evidence is going to be important, and then moving forward to be able to support testing and the automated testing that we see in our future. That gets us to having a view to say something around continuous compliance. And if you think back to some of the initial comments we made, having a risk mindset, moving away from strictly looking at the rules to where we have a better view that's driven by risk, enables us to think about continuous compliance, and as a result has a positive impact on our likelihood of having compliance lapses or incidences, but also recognizing that any methodology, any approach, any tooling has to be continuously extensible. It has to be to allow for the changes that will be in our future. So with that, we'll stop. JC, I'll hand back to you, and we're happy to take any questions or comments from folks on the call.
Thanks, Aiden. Thank you, Charlie. Let's see if there are any questions. One moment, please. I guess one question that has come up is there a way to go through audits for multiple frameworks more efficiently? Is it possible to get something done where it is, more than one framework at once? Charlie, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, because you have the ability to crosswalk multiple frameworks, you can use Hyperproof essentially to, for example, pull domain admin access out of AWS. You can do that in an automated manner, but then you can push that to multiple different controls against other frameworks. So it's like pull the information once, but provide it for multiple potential audits.
Got it. Our next question is, do the frameworks we talked about today come within the Hyperproof tool? Aiden?
Yeah, I'll address that. And that's a great question, because it's one thing having the enabling framework, but we have to enable it with the reason that we're doing something. So the short answer is yes. And I mentioned that we currently have 55 frameworks stood up within Hyperproof, and we're adding new ones all the time, and they're crosswalked between each other. And that include what you would expect to see, the most common ones: SOC 2, ISO, NIST CSF, a bunch of privacy frameworks, some of the European ones that are industry specific, HIPAA is in there, et cetera. So short answer, or long answer perhaps, is yes, they're in there.
Got it. Another question is, to kind of move towards a more operational oriented approach to managing IT compliance projects from a people or kind of workflow management perspective. Do you have any advice for how to structure maybe your teams? Have you seen potentially organizations with an in-house compliance committee and how those are structured?
Charlie, do you have a thought on that?
Well, it's dependent on the size, complexity of the organization. I don't have a good answer for it, to be perfectly honest with you. Do you, Aiden?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. I think we do see some organizations with compliance committees. What we're seeing, I think, and a lot of the focus around this call this morning has been on security and privacy kinds of frameworks and controls. So I think what we're seeing there is that those folks oftentimes reside within the CISO's organization, and we're seeing a lot more focus on getting that group stood up, and a recognition that there's a lot of work to do, taking the very technical work that people in security do and putting the business and compliance spin on it. And so we're seeing a lot of focus on organizations building up capabilities around security assurance as a function, and that's positive. And then I think where we're seeing a little bit of a difference is that on the security and privacy end of controls, we're seeing more rigor, we're seeing more discipline, and we're seeing much more of a risk and control focus. On some of the more compliance areas outside of those domains, and that maybe is more broadly around regulatory compliance, we're not seeing as much of an operations discipline. We're seeing a lot of focus on content and opinion. And so I think there's differences in the domain around what we're seeing organizations respond.
Thank you. The next question, can you link the standards to written procedures that can come out of the tool?
That's a great question, and the answer again is yes. The ability to associate all kinds of content with a control or with a framework goes well beyond just evidence and proof. It goes into areas like policies and procedures and SOPs. And so yes, the ability to link those in there is an important function that's provided.
Thank you. As a SaaS solution product, I go through many security reviews by enterprise companies we are selling to. I answer hundreds of security questionnaires, and our SOC 2 report doesn't really aid in accelerating the process and lessen the manual effort of answering these questionnaires. Do you have advice on how our SOC 2 Type 2 can help accelerate the responses and lessen the amount of work that goes into answering the prospect-specific questionnaires?
Charlie, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I mean, the SOC 2 framework is both prescriptive, but also allows for some customization. If you've got a myriad of these questionnaires that you're filling out, you can adjust the SOC 2 Type 2 controls to meet those questions. If you got the same, I don't know, 25, 50, whatever it is, questions on each of those, you can build the SOC 2 controls around it to some degree. Other things you could do, I would ask. As an auditor, I've seen some pretty green auditors come through that will just simply say, I need you to fill out this form, or the same with a potential customer saying you got to fill out this form, and they don't truly understand the value of the SOC 2. So a conversation may be helpful, and we actually do that for our customers. We'll reach out to their auditors and say, hey, I know you're asking for these 100 questions, but they're covered in the SOC 2 or something else. So we try to help in that way, but you can modify the controls to help get there as well. And you've been in this space a long time. I'm not just picking on you because you're old. But what do you see in this space?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and the questioner raises an important point. I might have expected us as an industry to have solved for this problem better and earlier, but we haven't. And so I work with customers all the time now that are receiving huge security questionnaires. And my first response many times is, yeah, that's just a lot of information that's probably not that relevant, but nevertheless, it's been asked for. And so we do have to recognize that it's occurring. And I don't envy the task of anybody that's on the receiving end of those. And I talk to people at our customers all the time who have to deal with that. So quick answer is that it's going to remain a challenge for a while. And the way we're thinking about it within Hyperproof is that we want to enable the kind of questionnaire functionality that extracts from the existing controls base that we have and the testing and the evidence, and then match that over time to questionnaires. And so what that likely means for us is that we'll have to ingest different questionnaires. We'll have to go through a process of matching the evidence that we have, but at least it's in Hyperproof, it's in one place, and the controls that we have matching that, and then over time learning that, and we'll have some AI enablement in our tool that will get better than I will be at doing that, and then be able to, over time, get more efficient at responding. But I wish I could have an easy, quick, short-term answer for the question, or I don't. But it's something that many of our customers, I think broadly across the industry, we continue to struggle with.
All right, next question. Has Hyperproof itself received a SOC 2 Type 2 report? The short answer is yes.
It absolutely is. And I would be hugely embarrassed if I was ever talking to a customer and we didn't have one, and that we went through it. We've gone through it a couple of times. We'll continue to go through it. Selfishly, we live and we should act as we talk to our customers about. So having a robust internal controls environment supported by SOC 2 Type 2 is very important to us as a service provider.
Another question, what level of templates are provided for policy standards and procedures in Hyperproof for SOC 2, Type 1, and Type 2?
Charlie, I'm going to punt this one to you because you've been very instrumental in helping us and more importantly, our customers stand up the kind of policies and procedures that they want to have.
Yeah, so we have template policies and procedures for almost any size organization in any vertical. And so we provide those, and they're based on the trust criteria that they're going to be assessed against. But we provide those, but they still need to be tailored because not everyone's the same. So it's about what do you need, and we've got it, and we can provide it. So that's what we've done to date. Anything to add to that, Aiden?
Yeah, I would just say that that's a consistent approach with how we think about, for instance, illustrative controls. So as you know, our frameworks, we have the requirements in there. We'll also provide some illustrative controls, but exactly the same kind of thinking, Charlie, right? It's a place to start. But I do think it's really important because many organizations, oftentimes the first time that they come across these kinds of frameworks or requirements is something that's placed upon them. A customer may ask for something and they don't necessarily have a good place to start. So at least having a place to start is important. And then providing templates and guidance, as you do very well with your clients, Charlie, just supports our approach around providing a starter set of controls for some of these frameworks. And then very importantly, providing the crosswalking and the mapping to ensure that we get efficient.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Aiden, because a lot of times people hear, "Oh, I just got to create policies," and once they start looking at the control frameworks, they start going, "Oh my God, this is a lot harder than I thought, and I need some help." And so that's why we provide the templates and some basic guidance to help them through the process as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's good.
One last question. Any integrations with third-party vendor scorecards like Security Scorecard, BitScore, or OneTrust?
That's a great question. And the way that Hyperproof thinks about that is more broadly around being able to understand, first of all, where our customers are extracting valuable information that influences their view on control effectiveness. And so as opposed to thinking about a bit score integration, the way we think about it is, do we have controls in place that utilize evidence scoring from an organization or a function like bit score, and how does that influence the control? If it does, then that's a piece of evidence that will suggest a control is effective or not effective. Then yes, we would want to be able to extract that evidence. And so I'll characterize it like that rather than an integration, because we see that kind of ingesting of evidence as being a core part of hyperproof. We think it's a core part of this kind of technology, and less about it being an integration. And so, yes, in terms of building the integration, the ingestion of evidence, that's important across a whole range of these kinds of tools.
Well, those are all the questions we've gotten today. With that, I just want to say thank you, everyone on the line, for joining us for this presentation. Really hope that there's something useful you got out of this. And I really want to thank you, Charlie and Aiden, for preparing this and sharing your knowledge and insights with us today.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. And Charlie, thank you as well. Always great to work with you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. It was a pleasure. And any questions, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.